So as you probably already guessed, we are flying across the Scottish Highlands. It's crazy to think that 400 million years ago these peaks were the tallest mountains in the world, even higher than the Himalayas. Of course, being so much more ancient than the Himalayas, they've since been eroded down by rivers and rain and glacial ice. The Scottish Highlands formed when Scotland collided with England. That might sound quite strange, but if we look at a geological map of the British Isles, you can see a distinct geological boundary that runs pretty much directly along the modern day Scottish border. And funnily enough, this is exactly where the collision took place, and I always wonder, would it be cool if the contrast between the underlying geology of these two regions was actually what impacted the difference in culture? I mean, geology is going to dictate the terrain, what plants and animals can live here, the climate, the availability of natural resources. Maybe this collision 400 million years ago defined the culture today. Of course, when I say England and Scotland, I don't just mean these landmasses that we know of today, kind of floating on their own around the Atlantic. Half a billion years ago, this is what the Earth would have looked like. England and Wales were just a small part of a larger microcontinent called Avalonia, and Scotland, meanwhile, was a small part of an even bigger continent known as Laurentia. However, much like the Pacific Ocean is today, this ocean was closing, and we can tell this from ancient volcanic evidence. Much like the Pacific Ocean is today, that the Iapetus Ocean was surrounded by subduction zones, creating this ring of fire-like line of volcanoes. Oh, and also this is the continent of Baltica, which one day became Scandinavia. That will be important in a moment. So around 470 million years ago, the Iapetus Ocean closed and the continents collided. This intense pressure folded and buckled the Earth's crust, creating a vast mountain belt. This was effectively one of the early stages in the formation of the supercontinent Pangaea. At this time, the mountain range would have stood in the very centre of Pangaea, forming the aptly named Central Pangaean Mountain Range. In fact, the Central Pangaean Mountain Range that forms the Scottish Highlands is the same mountain range that runs up the length of Norway, creating the nice fiddly bits and fjords on the west coast, with the rest of the mountain belt carrying on across Laurentia. So what we see here in Scotland is just a very small part of this huge mountain range. So how can we work out what happened to the rest of it? Well, there is a very useful clue. It's one of the most conspicuous geological features on the planet. There is a huge linear scar that runs right across the length of Scotland, from around Fort William all the way up to Inverness. It's called the Great Glen Fault. It's a strike-slip fault, which means the landmasses on either side are sliding past each other. It's a bit like the San Andreas Fault in California, but this one is just so much more obvious. I mean, it's even visible from space. This is, of course, due to glaciers. By the end of the last ice age, Scotland was kind of unveiled as temperatures warmed and ice sheets retreated. Glaciers had gouged out these huge valleys and troughs by exploiting weaknesses in the underlying rock. Now, a lot of the rock around us here is volcanic granite and Precambrian bedrock, very strong, old, crystalline rock. However, all of that friction along the Great Glen Fault, where the two sides had slid against each other for millions of years, slowly pulverized the bedrock, creating a much weaker sediment along the fault line. This was easily worn away by the glaciers, which occupied the entire length of the fault, producing these huge valleys and lakes like Loch Ness. And I know I'm mispronouncing it. I tried a few times before to get the pronunciation right, and I couldn't do it. I'm so sorry. Now, if we look at this fault, you can see that it actually continues across into the ocean and also into Ireland. And it makes you wonder what the true extent of this fault system must be. Was it here before the mountain range broke apart? Because 200 million years ago, of course, Pangaea broke up, the continents began to slowly achieve their modern-day configuration, and as a result, the Central Pangaean Mountains were literally torn to pieces as the Atlantic Ocean began to form. So here we are, still flying along the Great Glen Fault. You can see this linear feature stretching off into the distance. It's a little bit wider here, of course, but we are not in Scotland. In fact, we're not even in Europe. We're in Newfoundland, in eastern Canada. And yet, there it is, clear as day, the same northwest to southeast, northeast to southwest feature, linear feature that cuts across Scotland is here too. This tells us that Canada and Scotland were once connected. Around us we have rock that is the same composition, the same age, we have fossils of the same age and the same species, but for us in our aeroplane, this big fault is pretty clear evidence for us. This also means that technically the Scottish Highlands, and I guess the Norwegian coastline as well, are literally a part of the Appalachians, which is really weird. But I hope you're still enjoying these short little trips. I sure am enjoying making them. As always, if you have any suggestions for future trips, please do leave a comment or just hassle us on Twitter. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye!